Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to can some moose stew. Here we have some moose that needs to be used up, which is why we are doing this today. So we have basic moose stew ingredients or beef stew ingredients, but we've got some carrots and onions here, some potatoes from our garden, carrots and onions from our garden, and moose meat that we harvested. We're also going to be adding some garlic to each jar, salt, and pepper. And we do the raw pack method, which I encourage you to go and look it up. You may be able to find it under the Ball book, but this is just what we do for our family. So, which raw packing is easy. You just take your cold jars, pack it with all raw, room temperature to cold. And then we're going to be adding broth. In this case, I'm adding tomatoes, whole peeled tomatoes in their juice. And then you add it to a cold canner and bring it all up to temp all at once and can it, which we'll go through. This is just a number 10 can of whole peeled tomatoes from Costco. You can use plain water, you can use beef broth. I don't do beef broth because the moose meat will create its own juice and we'll mix in with the tomatoes. And then, let's see, we also have our lids warming up back here, softening up so they seal better. Some people don't do that. I always do it. And I think that's about it, so we can get started. Okay, so first thing we're going to do for this is we're going to I add my seasonings first to the bottom of each jar, which in this case is going to be a teaspoon of garlic and a half a teaspoon of pepper and a half a teaspoon of salt. I usually use a teaspoon of salt, but because these canned tomatoes already have salt in them, citric acid, I'm just going to add a half teaspoon of salt so it's not too salty. Okay, so since we are using whole canned tomatoes, we need to smush them up, which, I mean, you could cut them up if you want and take them out. I like to do it with my hands. So you just go in and you just start smushing them until they're at a, like, diced stage, I guess. So this is going to take me just a little bit, probably, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. And then I'll come back and show you what it all looks like as I get juice all over me. Okay. That's it for that. Now we'll start with and layer our meat, which is roughly, I don't know, I usually don't really measure a lot, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to say approximately about a cup of meat to a quart-sized jar. So of course, if you're going to do these in pints, which you could, I never do because it's not really, I don't know what the word is. Doesn't really work for us, even though it's just the two of us.
How much moose meat did you start with?
This is 5 pounds exactly of moose meat because my husband's a good weigher. And again, you can add more meat if you want. But again, when you're canning, you do want to go by a tested recipe. So, especially if you're just starting out. But again, we always use clean everything. We don't mess around with it. I use hot, clean, soapy jars that I've washed, rinse them out. If you're doing a hot liquid in hot jars, make sure everything's hot. If you're doing room temperature, make sure everything's room temperature, but very, very clean. We wash everything, so I'm not too worried about getting sick. Haven't yet. So now I'm going to add, I've got potatoes here. I'm going to say probably, I don't know, a cup of potatoes, not tomatoes. And these are, again, from our garden, but they've peeled. You don't want to use peeled or non-peeled, unpeeled in here because I know some people do it. I don't, just because of contamination in the peels and stuff.
And it turns it brown.
And it turned it brown. It's not pretty. And this is what we work hard for in the summer. This is why. Because we are probably, I don't know, what would you say as far as we rarely eat anything processed.
Almost never.
And when we do, we find that we're not feeling very good afterwards. So we try to steer clear of it as much as possible. But even though our potatoes didn't do the greatest this year, it still was able to do this. So
here it is, almost mid-January, and they're still eating them.
That's true. Okay, now we're going to move to, I just have a bunch of carrots and onions diced up in here. And this is a lot. This is not going to all go in here because I'm also going to be doing some beef barley. So I just cut everything up all at once.
Miss K means moose barley.
Oh, moose barley. That's what I meant.
Beef doesn't happen around here very often,
yeah.
As long as we're successful.
You'd think by now I would stop calling it beef, but. So when you fill up your jars, you want to, and again, you can add less potatoes and more vegetables. I did not put any celery in this today because I didn't have any. But you want to keep everything an inch below. You want to give it 1 inch headspace, which is usually on this quart jar, the bottom ring. What was it, 4 years ago when we did our first canning run? I was terrified.
Even though your Granny Belle and all of our grandparents and great-grandparents and older, that's exactly how they preserve food.
Right. But still, when you're starting out, pressure canners are, I mean, a lot of people still don't use pressure canners. They use water bath canners for everything. But with the way that we live, you'd have to water bath it for 3 hours, which is just wouldn't work for us with our setup. Okay. So I think that's good for that. And then I'm going to add some water to this just to thin it out a little bit. We don't want it that thick because then it won't get to the bottom there. Okay, I put some water in here. I'm going to add just a little bit more water. And again, you can use all water. You can use broth. I'm just doing the tomatoes because we need to use the can of tomatoes. Okay. We keep enough for the two of us. Okay, so now I'm just adding this liquid. Probably overstuffed that a little bit, but we'll debubble it here in a minute. I'll show you. All right, so those are all filled up. As you can see, they are above the inch line, but now we're going to do debubble, which is taking, you can use a butter knife if you don't have one of these, but I don't like to use that against the glass, so I use this little gadget that usually comes with most canning kits. And we're just going to get all the air bubbles out of there, and that should have some of that go down. And if it's still above the 1 inch headspace line, then just take some off the top out, which is what I'm going to have to do. So I'll show you that in a minute. So you want to try and get this, I just do it around the sides and then down the middle. And again, that just helps with, I've never had a jar break or bust during canning. And I think this is one of the reasons why.
We have had one siphon.
Yeah, you'll get siphoning, but as long as they stay sealed, and if you're too concerned about with the amount of liquid, you just stick it in the refrigerator and use it right away after it cools down. Okay, so I went a little overboard. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to take some out of each jar. And then top it off with a little bit more liquid and we should be good to go. All right, so I just went in and took a little off of each jar because I overfilled them. And again, you want an inch of headspace. And I'm not going to go into all the whys and stuff like that. So again, consult the ball book or a national testing site. But on the end of this debubbler, there's also a measurer, and it goes from like a 1/4 inch to an inch. So you can make sure you have the right headspace, which now we do. So almost done. Next thing I do is I have a little bit of vinegar in here, and I just take a paper towel and I wipe around the edge of each jar. And that's just to make sure it's going to seal properly, and it's to get any bits and pieces of tomato or juice that may have gotten around the lid. And some stuff says you don't really need to do this with. I do it with everything that I can. Again, I think we have had one jar fail, so in the 4 years that we've been doing this consistently. So it's a pretty good rate. Okay, so now, here's my little tool. I have my lids that are in here, and we're just going to take it and we're going to put them on the jar. And again, I am doing this by raw pack method, which everything goes in at room temperature. You have room temperature ingredients, room temperature jars, and it's going into a room temperature water in here. And we use the All-American canner, which holds 7 quarts or 14 pints. So yeah, if you're going to heat everything up, then you want everything to be hot, including the water. But for this one, we're going to bring everything up to temp together. Screw your bands on. I just do them finger tight. And then we're just going to put them in the canner. Do this, and we'll show you what it looks like in just a minute. All right, so all of our jars are in here. Again, I got 7 quart jars in here. I use about between 2 to 3 inches of water in this pressure canner. Again, whatever pressure canner you have might say something different, so just read the instructions. And then we're going to put our lid on. Get it all on here, and you'll have a little arrow that tells you how to line stuff up. We're just going to tighten this up. Okay, that looks good. So we're just gonna get her cranked up, let it all come up, and it'll start venting out of here. It's gonna take a little while to do that. Once it starts venting out of here, we're gonna let it vent for 10 minutes. And then once my timer goes off after 10 minutes of venting, then we'll put our weight on. And okay, so it's been about, I don't know, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, because we brought everything up from room temperature together. So now we are venting, and I don't know if you can see it. Do you want a steady stream of steam? Be careful, don't burn yourself. Coming out of this vent. And once you do that, once you see that, then you can set your timer for 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes has passed. Timer just went off. I'm going to put the weight on, do this carefully. In Alaska, I do it at 10 pounds of pressure is what ours is at. So I'm going to find that and then just stick it on there. Don't touch it after that because it'll get really hot. So now we're just going to continue with getting these canned up, and it'll be 90 minutes for these quarts. I think if you do it in pints, it's 75 minutes. Again, check your ball book or whatever national site you choose to use. So 10 pounds of pressure in Alaska for 90 minutes for these quarts. And oh, you'll hear this kind of with jiggle, and you'll hear it, and then that's when you want to start your timer. So once it starts doing that, like once per minute, I think is what the book says, then you'll want to start your timer then, not right now. I want to wait till I hear that jiggle. And then we'll just come back and we'll see you guys when this is done. And so once your 90 minutes is up, just turn it off. Do not take this down. Let it depressurize back down to the gauge says 0. Do not take this off or it'll be bad. Never done it before, never had it happen, but you do not want to take this off until this gets down to 0. We'll see you back when this is done. Once it gets down to 0, I'll take this off, take the lid off, let it sit for about 10 minutes inside, everything inside. Then we'll take the lid off, and then I'll show you guys the finished product once we go to set it out.